Hey guys, I thought I would walk you through this pretty simple applique embroidery project. First, you'll need an embroidery hoop. If you've never used an embroidery hoop before, you need to separate them, putting the one without the screw on the bottom, putting the one with the screw on top, and then tightening until the fabric is nice and taut. To make the skull face, all I did was I folded white felt in half and I drew kind of like a backwards letter C and then a backwards L. So if you're struggling, like thinking, how am I going to draw, a skull, calavera, then you just draw a backwards C and a backwards L. And then if, of course, if you're lefty, you could do it the opposite way. I just cut it out. And if you might have noticed, I'm drawing with chalk. I love using chalk when I'm using fabric because you can erase it really easily just by wiping it off. Now you'll notice I don't have it pinned on here. I just laid it on there and then I'm going to work on the other shapes. Next up, I folded a piece of black felt in half and cut out a couple of circles that will be for the eye sockets. And then I'm going to cut out a little heart and place it upside down for the nose. This one was a little tricky to do because now I'm cutting things that are a little bit smaller. But if I can do it, you can do it. And I just placed that, like I said, kind of upside down on the face. Now, I could have needle felted those pieces in place, and I'm going to show you how in just a moment. But before I do, here I am just cutting out some more upside down heart shapes that'll also be used for the eyes, just like that. Now, when I get ready to embroider, I'm going to do what's called a running stitch, and I'll show you how I go about threading a needle first and separating the thread. I'm using embroidery floss here, and I'm using what's called a chenille needle. You could also use an embroidery needle. I like to use chenille needles because they have a large eye and a really sharp point. In case you're not familiar, a running stitch is simply when you bring your needle up and then go back down. If you're stitching with children or you are a person who's not stitched before, think of it this way. Your needle is like a person swimming. They go up and then they dive down. Tying a knot, slide your needle under your last stitch, pull it, and then slide it through the loop that it creates. There's the loop, slide it through, do that twice, and cut. I know I went really fast. You might need to watch that a couple of times if you're unfamiliar with how to make a knot. Here I am separating embroidery floss. Floss comes with 6 strands of yarn. I always divide it in half. And you'll want to pull it very, very slowly because if you pull it too fast, it will simply knot up at the bottom. And if it does knot up, it's not the end of the world. Just give the very end of the yarn a tug, and that will help you be able to pull it without having it knotted. Then to go about threading the needle, I think that you all can figure that one out, but I do have a little hack for that. You could take a folded piece of paper, I call it a hot dog bun, place the thread inside, and then slide that little hot dog bun through the eye of the needle. Here I am now just tacking down some of the other pieces. Again, notice that I did not pin them in place. I could have, I guess, used a little bit of tacky glue if you're trying to get out of doing a little bit of sewing or embroidery. But what I love about embroidery is that it's kind of like drawing with thread. So you can do different kinds of lines and shapes as you're stitching things in place. When I'm stitching the mouth, I'm just drawing with my thread, or embroidering, I guess I should say, a horizontal line, and then I add little vertical stitches to kind of give it the parts of the mouth. Again, I started in the back. You always want to start all of your stitches in the back and you want to end in the back. The reason being is because that's where all the knots will be. Okay, next up is adding the little parts for the eyes. And notice that I just went ahead and I stacked the blue heart on top of the black circle. And now I'm just going to stitch through the whole thing. Not even stitching around it to tack it down. I'm just stitching where the little heart is. And then I'm going to do some decorative stitches around it. Again, this is where you can have a lot of fun because you could do a zigzag line. You could even do flower kind of shapes, which would be really pretty since you're doing this like a skull. So you can get super creative with your stitches. And I'm just still kind of doing that running stitch, bringing it up and pulling it all the way back down. By the way, I forgot to mention, when you are stitching, you'll always want to stop when your thread is about as long as your hand. The reason is because that will give you enough thread to tie a knot, which is what you see me doing right here. If it gets too short, then it's going to be very difficult for you to make a knot on the back. Okay, let's talk about needle felting. If you're going to go about needle felting, you have to have a cushion underneath. And that's what I've got here. And I'm cutting out a couple of flower shapes from felt. For needle felting, you'll need a cushion. You'll need a needle felting needle. Those needles are very, very sharp and serrated. So if you poke yourself, there will be blood. And I'm just cutting out a couple of different flower shapes. Notice I'm using a pencil. The pencil is for me to kind of hold what I'm needle felting in place as I stab, because like I mentioned, it is a very sharp tool. So you'll want to make sure that you keep your fingers out of the way, unlike what I'm doing right here. Then what I'm using for the center of the flower is a little bit of roving. Roving can be purchased at craft stores, and you could also make your flowers out of that. I just wanted to take a shortcut and have my flowers pre-made. So if you were thinking, Cassie, I thought you could only needle felt wool and you're using craft felt. Well, then you thought wrong, because you can needle felt craft felt. And that's how I got my flowers to stay put. I could have technically done the whole face that way just by stabbing with my needle felting tool. So here I am just finishing up those flowers at the top. I could have gotten a lot more creative and elaborate with this, but I felt like it was pretty close to being done. Now that it's finished, I can go ahead, put it back on the hoop, because that's how I'm going to hang it. Once you've got it in the hoop, then you can trim the excess fabric off. You'll want to do this step last. Do not do this step first. And I think you'll find that you'll have some pretty amazing and easy, right, artwork when you're finished. Thanks, guys.